There is something in the mountains. For more than a century, the rugged mountains of central Arizona have drawn treasure hunters, adventurers, and thrill seekers from across the United States. They came chasing a legend, an enormous cache of gold, rumored to be hidden somewhere deep within the jagged peaks and canyons of the Superstition Mountains. Many believed the stories were exaggerated. Others were convinced the treasure was real. Some of them never came back. Over the decades, countless people have vanished while searching for this fabled fortune. Their disappearances were often dismissed as tragic accidents, men and women overcome by heat, thirst, or the unforgiving terrain. But as time passed, a darker pattern began to emerge. In some cases, bodies were eventually recovered, years later, miles away from where they were last seen. What investigators found was deeply disturbing. Skeletons scattered across the desert floor, bones shattered in ways that suggested violence rather than exposure. And most chilling of all, many of the remains were missing their heads. Decapitation is not a typical result of dehydration, heat stroke, or a fall. And yet, again and again, those searching for the legendary gold seem to meet the same grim fate. Local authorities struggled to explain it. Families demanded answers, and whispers began to spread. Stories of unseen watchers in the mountains, of figures glimpsed on distant ridgelines, of something ancient and hostile that did not want intruders trespassing in its domain. To the indigenous Apache tribes who lived near the Superstition Mountains long before settlers arrived, these stories were nothing new. They had warned outsiders for generations that the land was cursed, that powerful forces lived within the mountain's caves and tunnels, forces that punished greed, arrogance, and disrespect. Their warnings were ignored. The gold was too tempting. As the years went on, the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine transformed from a local myth into a national obsession. Newspapers printed stories of sudden wealth and mysterious deaths. Prospectors armed themselves and vanished into the wilderness, convinced they would succeed where others had failed. Few did. Those who returned often spoke of strange experiences, unnatural silences, the feeling of being watched, unexplained lights moving through the night sky. Some claimed they heard voices echoing through empty canyons. Others said they saw figures standing where no human could possibly reach. Most were ridiculed, until the bodies were found. By the mid-20th century, the number of unexplained deaths in and around the Superstition Mountains had reached into the dozens. By the early 21st century, that number had climbed past 100, too many to ignore, too similar to dismiss. Whether the cause is human, natural, or something far more disturbing remains unknown. But one conclusion has proven impossible to escape. Those who enter these mountains searching for gold are not alone. Something is watching. Something has been watching for a very long time. And whatever it is, it does not want to be found. The Deputy, 1958. April of 1958 was brutal, even by Arizona's unforgiving standards. The desert had settled into a prolonged heat wave that showed no sign of breaking. For more than 2 weeks, daytime temperatures had refused to drop below 30 degrees Celsius, and the sun seemed to hang motionless in the sky, radiating an unrelenting, oppressive heat. By mid-morning, the mountains were already shimmering. Pinal County Sheriff's Deputy Benjamin Cruz moved slowly along a narrow trail that cut through the northern slopes of the Superstition Mountains. Each step stirred fine dust that clung to his boots and rose into the air before settling back onto his uniform. Sweat soaked through the fabric at his collar and under his arms, but the air was so dry it evaporated almost as quickly as it formed. There was no shade, no shelter, only rock, scrub, and silence stretching for miles in every direction. Cruz had been born and raised in Arizona. He understood the desert. He respected it. But even for him, the conditions that day were punishing. The sunlight reflected off pale stone and sand, turning the trail into a corridor of heat that pressed in from all sides. The wind, when it came, offered no relief, only hot, dusty gusts that burned the lungs. He stopped and raised his canteen, tipping it back to drain the last mouthful of lukewarm water. The liquid barely took the edge off his thirst. When he shook the container, the faint slosh confirmed what he already knew. Nearly empty. A quiet curse escaped his lips. Thankfully, he had a second canteen clipped to his belt, He hadn't planned on bringing it. In fact, he had almost left it behind in the patrol car. But his partner, Deputy Joe Donaldson, had insisted. "Take mine," Donaldson had said, "just in case." At the time, Cruz had smirked and told him he worried too much. Now, he was grateful. Donaldson had remained with the two hikers who had flagged them down on the highway earlier that morning. The young men, college-aged, maybe early 20s, had been visibly shaken. Their clothes were dusty, their faces pale beneath sunburned skin, and their eyes carried the unmistakable look of people who had seen something they didn't fully understand. They claimed they had stumbled upon a campsite deeper in the mountains. Something was wrong with it, they said. No one there. Blood. Equipment scattered. When Cruz and Donaldson arrived, one look at the hikers' expressions made the decision easy. They were in no condition to guide anyone through the mountains. They were jumpy, distracted, and visibly frightened. They would slow things down. Cruz had them repeat the directions, once, twice, again. He asked the same questions in different ways, watching for inconsistencies. But the story never changed. Eventually, he nodded, memorized the route, and headed off alone while Donaldson stayed behind with the hikers and the patrol car. The trail climbed steadily, winding between jagged rock formations and patches of scrub that offered little cover from the sun. Time stretched in the heat. Minutes felt like hours. Cruz checked his watch more than once, surprised at how little time had actually passed. Roughly 30 minutes after leaving the highway, he saw it. A break in the terrain. Just off the main trail, partially concealed behind a low rocky outcrop, lay the remains of a campsite. At first glance, it looked abandoned. The desert had already begun reclaiming it. Fine sand dusted everything, bedrolls, packs, cookware, softening edges and dulling colors. But as Cruz stepped closer, the details sharpened and his unease grew. This place had not been left willingly. He removed a small notepad and pencil from his breast pocket and began a slow, methodical walk around the perimeter. Years in law enforcement had taught him to take his time, to observe before touching, to let the scene speak for itself. Near the center of the camp lay a gun cleaning kit, its contents scattered in a wide metallic arc across the ground. Brushes, rods, and cloths lay half buried in sand. Cruz crouched and examined them closely. No spent shell casings. That was good, but the firearm itself, the reason for the kit's presence, was nowhere to be seen. That was not. He straightened and scanned the area, his eyes following the ground instinctively. The desert floor told a story to anyone who knew how to read it. And here, the story was clear. There had been a struggle, deep scuff marks cut through the sand. Divots suggested sudden movements, dragging, resistance. Footprints overlapped chaotically, their edges softened by wind but still visible. Nearby, the remains of an evening meal were scattered as if abandoned mid-bite. A pot lay on its side. Utensils were flung several feet away. This was not a calm departure. As Cruz continued his sweep, one object caught his attention, a Geiger counter. He paused, staring at it. It was old but unmistakable. He had seen enough movies and training footage to recognize it immediately. What a Geiger counter was doing in a desert campsite was anyone's guess, but it suggested the owner had been searching for something specific, something unusual. Still, unsettling as it was, the counter did not prepare him for what he noticed next. Several feet from the camp, tangled in the branches of a low desert bush, hung a military-style sleeping bag. Cruz approached slowly. Even before he reached it, he could see the dark stains soaking through the fabric. Up close, there was no mistaking it. Blood, old, dried, saturated deep into the material. He swallowed hard. Nearby, partially hidden beneath a rock, lay several pieces of paper. Cruz knelt and carefully lifted them. Letters, notes, correspondence of some kind. But every identifying detail, names, addresses, any personal information had been deliberately torn away. Not lost, removed. Cruz felt a chill that had nothing to do with the heat. He reached for his radio and called Donaldson, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. He instructed his partner to get back to town and bring reinforcements. This scene was beyond a routine welfare check. When the transmission ended, the silence returned, heavy, absolute. Cruz sat down on a nearby rock, pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. The smoke curled upward, vanishing almost instantly in the dry air. He stared out across the mountains, waiting. He had seen scenes like this before. Not identical, but familiar. Out here, bodies had a way of turning up eventually, sometimes days later, sometimes months, sometimes years. The desert preserved secrets, but it never kept them forever. As he waited, one thought repeated itself in his mind, grim, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. If they were lucky this time, the head might still be attached. The Superstition Mountains. The Superstition Wilderness Reserve stretches across a vast and unforgiving expanse of land east of Phoenix, Arizona. Covering more than 160,000 acres of rugged terrain, the region is a maze of jagged peaks, deep canyons, narrow passes, and sun-scorched valleys. From the air, the mountains appear chaotic and broken, as though the earth itself was torn apart and never fully healed. At the heart of this wilderness rises Superstition Mountain, a towering monolith that reaches nearly 3,000 feet into the sky. Its sharp ridgelines cut stark silhouettes against the horizon, and its sheer rock faces glow red and gold under the desert sun. From a distance, the mountain looks almost unreal, ancient, immovable, and watching. To modern hikers and tourists, the superstitions are often described as beautiful but dangerous. Temperatures can soar well beyond what the human body can endure. Trails disappear without warning. Sudden storms flood narrow canyons in minutes. Even experienced outdoorsmen have underestimated this land and paid the price. But long before maps were drawn or trails were marked, the mountains already had a reputation, one of fear and reverence. Long before European settlers set foot in Arizona, indigenous tribes lived in the shadow of the Superstition Mountains. Among them, the Apache held the land in particularly deep regard. To them, this was not simply a mountain range. It was a living place infused with power, memory, and danger. According to Apache belief, the Superstition Mountains were the dwelling place of a powerful thunder god. This entity was said to live deep within the mountain itself, hidden in a vast network of caves, tunnels, and underground chambers. When angered, the thunder god could rise from the depths, bringing destruction to the land above, violent storms, earthquakes, fire, and death. To prevent this, the Apache believed constant respect was required. Offerings, ceremonies, sacrifices. Only through regular acts of worship could balance be maintained. The mountain was not evil, but it was unforgiving. Those who approached it with arrogance or greed did so at great risk. But the thunder god was not the only thing said to dwell within the superstitions. There was another belief, one spoken of in whispers. Apache oral traditions described a place hidden somewhere within the mountains, a bottomless chasm concealed among the cliffs and ravines. This opening was said to descend endlessly into darkness, a passage leading directly into the underworld. Not a symbolic underworld, but a literal one. A place of fire, spirits, and unimaginable danger, a gateway to hell. Whether these stories were meant as spiritual warnings or literal descriptions has been debated for generations. But to the Apache, the message was clear. The mountains were not to be violated. Certain areas were forbidden entirely. Outsiders were warned to stay away. Those warnings were ignored. In the mid-16th century, Spanish conquistadors pushed northward from Mexico, driven by ambition, religious zeal, and an insatiable hunger for gold. They had heard rumors of rich mineral deposits hidden in the deserts and mountains of what is now Arizona. Tales of entire cities built from gold were not uncommon during this era, and the Superstition Mountains became one of many rumored treasure sites. When the Spanish arrived in the region during the 1540s, they encountered the Apache and other indigenous peoples who tried to turn them back. They warned the conquistadors of the dangers that awaited them in the mountains. They spoke of the thunder god, of death, of a land that punished intruders. The Spaniards dismissed these warnings as superstition. They pushed forward anyway. Before long, gold was discovered in the foothills and valleys surrounding the Superstition Mountains. Shallow seams and surface deposits were found, confirming that the legends held at least some truth. Small mining parties were organized, and soldiers were sent deeper into the mountains to extract the precious metal. At first, reports were encouraging. Then the deaths began. Mining parties stopped returning. Patrols sent to investigate found camps abandoned, equipment left behind. Signs of violence scattered across the rocky ground, and eventually, bodies, decapitated, mutilated, left in places that suggested intention rather than chaos. The soldiers' steel breastplates were found slashed and dented. Their matchlock rifles lay useless nearby. Whatever had attacked them did not seem to fear weapons, armor, or numbers. Entire groups vanished without leaving any clear explanation. At first, Spanish commanders blamed the Apache. Retaliatory raids were launched. Villages were attacked. But the killings did not stop. In some cases, bodies were found in areas that would have been impossible for the Apache or anyone else to reach quickly. In others, there were no signs of battle at all. No arrows, no gunfire, just silence and death. Fear began to spread among the conquistadors. Whispers circulated through camps of something else in the mountains, something that moved unseen, something that struck swiftly and disappeared back into the rocks. As losses mounted, morale collapsed. Eventually, the Spanish made a decision. They abandoned the region. The mountains were deemed cursed, not worth the cost in lives. Official expeditions ceased, and the Superstition Mountains were left behind, returning once more to silence. But the gold was never forgotten. Stories passed from generation to generation, tales of lost mines, hidden tunnels, and unimaginable wealth waiting just beyond reach. Each retelling grew more dramatic. Each warning faded further into the background. By the time American settlers began moving west in the 19th century, the Superstition Mountains had become a place of legend. Maps marked blank spaces where trails should have been. Locals spoke of travelers who went in and never came out, of strange lights seen at night, of voices carried on the wind. Still, people kept coming. The idea of gold, easy wealth hidden in plain sight, proved irresistible. Prospectors convinced themselves that the Spanish had failed because they lacked modern tools, better weapons, better knowledge. They believed the danger had been exaggerated. They were wrong. As the years passed, the Superstition Mountains claimed more lives. Prospectors vanished. Hunters disappeared. Bodies turned up in places that made no sense. The same disturbing details appeared again and again. Missing heads, scattered remains, signs of violence without a clear attacker. The mountain did not change. It waited. Today, the Superstition Wilderness Reserve is protected land. Trails are marked. Rangers patrol its edges. Tourists hike its lower slopes and photograph its peaks from a safe distance. Yet even now, the mountains retain an air of quiet hostility. Modern search and rescue teams still recover bodies from its depths. Some are hikers who underestimated the heat. Others are experienced outdoorsmen who made inexplicable mistakes. And some cases remain unresolved. No clear cause, no clear explanation. To the Apache, none of this is surprising. The mountains are doing what they have always done, defending themselves against those who enter with greed in their hearts. Whether the truth lies in ancient beliefs, human violence, or something far darker remains unknown. But one thing is certain. For centuries, the Superstition Mountains have offered the same warning to everyone who listens. Some places are not meant to be conquered, and some treasures are protected at any cost. The Lost Dutchman's Mine. By the mid-19th century, the Superstition Mountains were no longer just a place of myth and fear. They had become a destination, a challenge, a promise of unimaginable wealth hidden beneath layers of stone and legend. In the 1840s, that promise appeared to take physical form. The Peralta family, a wealthy and influential clan with roots stretching back to Spanish colonial Mexico, established a mining operation deep within the Superstition Mountains. According to historical accounts and family records, the Peraltas discovered a rich gold-bearing seam, one so productive that mule trains were allegedly used to transport ore south across the desert. For years, the operation was said to thrive, but the mountains were never forgiving. At some point, the Peralta mine fell silent. The family and their workers vanished from the superstitions, and what followed quickly became one of Arizona's darkest legends. Stories spread that the Peraltas had been massacred, either by Apache warriors defending sacred land or by something far more sinister that dwelled within the mountains themselves. When later expeditions attempted to locate the mine, they found nothing. No functioning tunnels, no active camp, no trace of organized mining. The Peralta mine disappeared into legend, its exact location lost to time, rumor, and bloodshed. For decades, the story faded into obscurity, until the 1870s. That was when a quiet, reclusive German immigrant named Jacob Waltz arrived in Arizona and changed everything. Waltz was not the kind of man who attracted attention. He dressed plainly, spoke little, and avoided crowds. Yet soon after settling in the region, people began to notice something unusual: gold. Waltz sold high-quality gold ore to local buyers and later directly to the U.S. Mint. The purity of the gold was remarkable, and its source was unmistakable. It came from the Superstition Mountains. When asked where he found it, Waltz always gave the same answer. He knew the location of a rich mine, but he would never reveal it. Witnesses reported that Waltz would vanish into the superstitions alone, carrying minimal supplies. He would be gone for days, sometimes weeks, and then return with sacks of gold-bearing ore. He never took companions, never hired help, never shared maps or directions. As rumors spread, people followed him. None succeeded. Before his death in 1891, official records indicate that Jacob Waltz sold more than $250,000 worth of gold to the U.S. Mint, an extraordinary sum for the time. On his deathbed, weakened by pneumonia, Waltz allegedly gave vague clues to the mine's location. These hints were contradictory, incomplete, and ultimately useless. When Waltz died, the mine died with him, or so it seemed. In the years that followed, the legend took on a new name. Despite Waltz being German, English-speaking locals mistakenly referred to him as a Dutchman, confusing Deutsch with Dutch. And so the lost mine became known forever as the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. What followed was not a gold rush, it was something far darker. In 1896, one of the earliest known victims of the legend met a gruesome end. An eccentric prospector, known for living alone in the Superstition Mountains, was found dead near his cabin. His body showed signs of severe trauma, as though he had been beaten repeatedly. What horrified those who found him most, however, was the arrangement. His head had been removed. It was placed carefully on a rock a short distance away, positioned as if to watch over the rest of his remains. The message was unmistakable. Others did not listen. Throughout the early 20th century, prospectors continued to enter the superstitions, convinced they could succeed where others had failed. Some believed Waltz's clues had been misinterpreted. Others claimed to possess secret maps passed down through families or purchased from questionable sources. In June of 1931, a man named Adolf Ruth announced his intention to find the Lost Dutchman's mine. He was not inexperienced. Ruth was an adventurer and treasure hunter with knowledge of the terrain and enough supplies to last for months. He never returned. When Ruth failed to make contact, his family hired a search party. Months passed with no sign of him. Then in December, his skull was discovered in a remote area of the mountains. There were 2 bullet holes in the forehead. Weeks later, the rest of his body was found several miles away, decapitated. One of his legs was badly broken and contained metal pins from a previous injury, allowing authorities to positively identify the remains. Despite the obvious inconsistencies, the coroner ruled Ruth's death a suicide, claiming he had shot himself when he could no longer walk. The family was outraged. They pointed out the obvious: no firearm was ever recovered. And even if one had been present, Ruth could not have shot himself in the head twice, especially after being incapacitated. Their protests changed nothing. The mountains kept their secrets. In 1947, another treasure hunter vanished. James Kidd was obsessed with the Lost Dutchman's mine. Unlike earlier seekers, he arranged to be flown by helicopter into a remote canyon within the Superstition Mountains. He established a base camp stocked with 2 weeks' worth of supplies and radioed that he was beginning his search. When the helicopter returned 2 weeks later, the pilot found the camp untouched. Food, water, and equipment remained exactly where Kidd had left them. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of Kidd. Search parties were organized. Tracker dogs were brought in. But the terrain was unforgiving, and weeks turned into months with no success. It would be nearly a year before hikers made a horrifying discovery. James Kidd's body was found rolled in a blanket and hanging from a rocky ledge. A rope had been tied tightly around the bundle to keep it suspended. His ribs were broken. His head was missing. Nearby, his identification papers, money, and clothing were neatly stacked in a small pile, weighted down with a rock to keep them from blowing away. Once again, there was no clear explanation. The deaths continued into the modern era. In December of 2009, a 35-year-old man named Jesse Capon vanished while searching for the lost Dutchman's mine. Capon was not new to the superstitions. He had made multiple trips and was deeply familiar with the legend. Friends described him as intelligent, cautious, and utterly obsessed with solving the mystery. When he failed to return, authorities found his car abandoned on a remote dirt road. His phone and wallet were still inside. 3 years later, Capon's remains were discovered. His body was shattered and wedged into a narrow crevasse, halfway down a sheer rock face. The location was inaccessible from above, and investigators could not determine how he could have fallen or been placed there. No clear cause of death was ever established. By this point, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Those who searched for the lost Dutchman's mine did not simply disappear. They were hunted, or punished, or removed. Across more than a century, the same details repeated themselves with disturbing consistency. Isolation, violence, decapitation, and deliberate arrangement of remains. Some victims were armed. Some were experienced outdoorsmen. Some used modern equipment, maps, even aircraft. None of it mattered. The mountain always won. Skeptics argue that many of these deaths can be explained by the brutal environment, heat stroke, falls, animal activity, or human violence unrelated to the legend. And undoubtedly, some cases fit those explanations, but not all. Not the missing heads, not the careful placement of personal belongings, not the impossibility of certain locations. To believers, the answer lies in the warnings that were ignored centuries ago, that the superstition mountains are protected by something ancient, relentless, and deeply hostile to those who seek to steal what lies beneath its surface. Whether that guardian is human, supernatural, or something else entirely remains unknown. But one fact remains undeniable. For over 100 years, the lost Dutchman's mine has clawed more than gold. It has claimed lives, and it continues to wait. Something else is watching. The unexplained deaths associated with the Superstition Mountains are disturbing enough on their own. But for those who have spent time in the region, the fatalities tell only part of the story. Beyond the disappearances, the mutilated remains, and the unanswered questions, there is another layer to the mystery, one that cannot be documented in police reports or autopsy records. Strange things are seen in these mountains. Again and again, visitors describe experiences that defy conventional explanation. Accounts come from hikers, hunters, park rangers, and locals, many of whom have nothing to gain from telling their stories and much to lose by being ridiculed for them. One of the most common reports involves lights in the sky. Witnesses speak of glowing orbs appearing after sunset, hovering silently above the ridgelines before drifting slowly across the desert air. These lights are often described as soft and spherical, ranging in color from pale white to deep orange. Unlike aircraft or helicopters, they make no sound. They do not blink, and they move with an unsettling deliberateness, stopping suddenly before changing direction without any visible means of propulsion. Some witnesses claim the orbs appear to observe people on the ground, maintaining a fixed distance as hikers move through the terrain. Others say the lights vanish the moment they are pointed out, dissolving into darkness as if they were never there at all. Skeptics have suggested explanations ranging from military flares to atmospheric plasma or distant campfires viewed through heat distortion. Yet, none of these explanations account for the consistency of the sightings, or the way they often coincide with reports of people going missing shortly afterward. The lights are only the beginning. Far more unsettling are the descriptions of something seen on the ground. For decades, scattered reports have emerged describing a tall, skeletal figure wandering the Superstition Mountains at night. Those who claim to have seen it say it appears humanoid in shape, but unnaturally thin, with elongated limbs and a posture that seems wrong somehow, too rigid, too deliberate. The figure is almost always described the same way. It walks alone across open plains or along ridgelines, moving slowly and purposefully. In one hand, it carries a lantern or light source that flickers with a weak yellow glow. Witnesses say it appears to be searching for something, scanning the ground as it moves, stopping occasionally before continuing on its path. Those who encounter it rarely see its face clearly, but when they do, They report hollow eyes and features stretched tight against bone, giving it the appearance of a living skeleton. Some claim its movements are jerky and unnatural, as if it is struggling to imitate the way humans walk. Almost without exception, witnesses describe an overwhelming sense of dread the moment they realize they are not alone. Many flee, others freeze, unable to move until the figure disappears into the darkness. Few stay long enough to observe what happens next. In 2015, a story surfaced that would bring renewed attention to the more disturbing aspects of the Superstition Mountains. A man hiking in the region with a group of friends contacted a popular documentary channel to share his experience. During their trip, the group stumbled upon wreckage from a small aircraft that had crashed several years earlier, killing all 6 people on board. They stopped to rest at the site. While there, the hiker took several photographs using his mobile phone, ordinary pictures meant to document the crash remains and the surrounding area. Nothing unusual was noticed at the time. The group left shortly afterward and completed their hike without incident. It was not until a week later, back at home, that anything strange emerged. As the man showed the photographs to his mother, she suddenly stopped and pointed at one image. "Who is that?" she asked. Confused, the hiker zoomed in on the photo. Standing approximately 15 meters behind the group was a figure none of them remembered seeing. The figure appeared male, dressed entirely in white, facing directly toward the camera. Its skin looked darkened, almost charred, as though burned. The facial features were indistinct, but unmistakably human-like, with eyes seemingly fixed on the photographer. The hiker was certain of one thing: that figure had not been there. The group had been traveling through an area with only one access route, one way in and one way out. For the figure to be standing behind them, it would have had to walk past the entire group at close range. No one saw it, no one heard it, no one felt its presence. Even more troubling was the fact that the figure appeared far too close to the crash site, an area many hikers already considered unsettling. Some who later reviewed the photograph suggested the figure might be connected to the victims of the crash. Others believed it was something else entirely. Whatever the truth, the image raised an uncomfortable question. If the figure was not visible at the time the photo was taken, what else might be watching unseen? According to official records, more than 100 unsolved deaths and disappearances have occurred within the boundaries of the Superstition Wilderness Reserve over the past century. The overwhelming majority of these cases involve individuals searching for the lost Dutchman's mine. While many deaths can be attributed to accidents, exposure, or human violence, a significant number remain unexplained. In several instances, experienced hikers with proper supplies vanished under conditions that should not have been fatal. Others were found in locations that defied logic, as though they had been placed there deliberately. The sheer number of cases and their concentration around specific areas of the mountains has led some researchers to question whether a pattern exists. Apache legends offer one possible explanation. According to traditional stories passed down through generations, the Superstition Mountains are home to beings known as underground dwellers. These entities are said to live beneath the earth, emerging only rarely to observe those who enter their territory. They are described as watchers, silent, patient. According to the legends, travelers can sometimes glimpse them standing on distant ridgelines, motionless and observing from afar. Those who encounter them directly are said to meet grim fates. Few survive long enough to tell what they saw. To the Apache, these beings are not monsters in the modern sense. They are guardians, enforcers of balance, tasked with protecting sacred land from those who approach with greed, or disrespect. From this perspective, the strange lights, the skeletal figure, and the unexplained deaths are not separate phenomena. They are all manifestations of the same underlying presence. Something ancient, something territorial, something watching. Skeptics argue that such explanations rely too heavily on folklore and coincidence. They point out that isolation, fear, and exhaustion can cause hallucinations, that lights in the sky can be misidentified, that photographs can be deceiving, and in many cases, they may be right. But skeptics cannot explain everything. They cannot explain how experienced outdoorsmen vanish without a trace. They cannot explain bodies found in impossible locations. They cannot explain why so many witnesses, separated by decades, describe the same figures, the same lights, and the same overwhelming sense of being watched. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between myth and reality. Perhaps human violence, environmental hazards, and ancient stories have become intertwined over time, feeding into one another until they can no longer be separated. Or perhaps the warnings were always meant to be taken literally, that the Superstition Mountains are not empty, that they are inhabited, and that whatever lives there does not welcome intruders, because for those who enter these mountains in search of gold, answers, or glory, one thing becomes increasingly clear. They are not alone, and they never were. A chilling parallel. Thousands of kilometers north of the Arizona desert, far from the scorched stone and cactus of the Superstition Mountains, lies another wilderness with a reputation just as dark, and in some ways, even more disturbing. It is located in Canada's Northwest Territories, a vast remote expanse of mountains, rivers, and forests known as Nahanni National Park Reserve. To most people, it is a place of breathtaking beauty, towering peaks, endless wilderness, untouched land stretching farther than the eye can see. But to those who know its history, Nahanni is known by another name, the Headless Valley. Long before it became a protected national park, Nahanni was feared by indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the Dene. Like the Apache of Arizona, they regarded the land with deep respect and caution. Certain areas were avoided entirely. Others were entered only when absolutely necessary. Their reason was simple. People who went too far into the valley often did not return, and when they did, something was missing. At the beginning of the 20th century, rumors of rich gold deposits began to spread across northern Canada. Prospectors, driven by the same dreams that once lured men into the Superstition Mountains, pushed into the Nahanni region in search of fortune. The land was harsh beyond imagination. Temperatures could plunge far below freezing. Rivers flooded without warning. Mountains rose abruptly from dense forest, their slopes treacherous and unforgiving. Yet gold has always had a way of silencing caution. In 1908, two brothers named Frank and Willie McLeod ventured into the Nahanni Valley to prospect for gold. They were experienced outdoorsmen, familiar with the dangers of the northern wilderness. When they failed to return, concern slowly turned into alarm. Search efforts were difficult and sporadic. The region was vast, isolated, and nearly impossible to navigate. It would be more than a year before the brothers were found. What searchers discovered shocked even seasoned trappers. The McLeod brothers' bodies were located near Virginia Falls, one of the most remote and dramatic features of the park. They were dead, decapitated. Their heads were never recovered. There were no signs of animal predation that could explain the condition of the remains. No evidence of an accident severe enough to cause such injuries. The bodies appeared deliberately altered, not destroyed by nature. The story spread quickly, and it was not the last. In the years that followed, more prospectors vanished in the Nahanni Valley. Cabins were found burned to the ground, their occupants nowhere to be seen. In some cases, bodies were recovered months or years later, again missing their heads. One particularly unsettling discovery involved a prospector named Martin Jorgensen. His charred remains were found inside his burned-out cabin. The fire should have destroyed everything, but his head was gone. As with the deaths in the Superstition Mountains, authorities struggled to provide convincing explanations. Wild animals were blamed, accidents were cited, exposure was often listed as the cause of death. But none of these explanations accounted for the repeated decapitations. The Dene people offered their own explanation. They spoke of beings known as the Naha. According to legend, the Naha were fierce, supernatural warriors, ghost-like entities that roamed the mountains and valleys. They were said to wear terrifying masks and take the heads of their enemies as trophies. Those who encountered them rarely survived to tell the story. To outsiders, these tales sounded like folklore designed to scare people away from dangerous land. But the pattern was difficult to ignore. Decades passed, and Nahanni's reputation only grew darker. Even experienced bush pilots refused to land in certain areas. Trappers altered their routes to avoid specific valleys. Government survey teams reported feelings of intense unease, equipment failures, and sudden urges to leave areas without knowing why. Some described the sensation as being watched. Others reported hearing voices carried on the wind, calling out in unfamiliar languages. And then there were the lights. Just as in the Superstition Mountains, reports emerged of strange aerial phenomena over Nahanni. Witnesses described glowing objects moving silently through the night sky, changing direction abruptly, and hovering over isolated regions of the park. In the mid-20th century, pilots flying over the area reported seeing bright orbs rise from the valley floor before vanishing into the clouds. Others claimed their instruments malfunctioned when passing over certain sections of the park. Once again, skeptics offered explanations: ball lightning, atmospheric effects, misidentified aircraft. Yet the similarities were unsettling. Different continents, different cultures, the same phenomena: decapitated bodies, burned shelters, unexplained lights, legends of inhuman guardians. As Nahanni gained international attention, the Canadian government eventually designated it a national park, restricting access and limiting human activity. Today, only a small number of visitors are allowed into the region each year, and many areas remain closed or accessible only by permit. Despite these measures, the stories have not stopped. Modern hikers and researchers continue to report strange experiences. Some claim they felt sudden, overwhelming fear in certain locations, forcing them to turn back without understanding why. Others describe seeing shadowy figures at the edge of their vision or hearing footsteps that vanish when they stop to listen. Search and rescue teams operating in the park have privately admitted that some cases defy logic. People disappear without leaving tracks. Campsites are found abandoned, supplies untouched. In rare instances, remains are recovered in places that should have been impossible to reach. The official explanations remain cautious. Unofficially, comparisons to the Superstition Mountains are unavoidable. In both places, gold drew people into remote, dangerous terrain. In both places, indigenous cultures warned outsiders to stay away. In both places, those warnings were ignored. And in both places, decapitated bodies became a recurring theme. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the similarities raise uncomfortable questions. Why do these two regions, separated by thousands of miles, share such specific details? Why heads? Why the careful placement of remains? Why the persistent reports of watchers, lights, and unseen presences? Some researchers suggest that these patterns point to human causes: secretive groups, violent individuals, or criminal activity hidden by isolation and time. Others believe the answer lies deeper, that certain places on Earth are fundamentally different, that they hold geological, magnetic, or environmental properties capable of affecting human perception and behavior, or that they are tied to something older, something that predates modern civilization. To the Apache, the Superstition Mountains are protected by powerful forces. To the Dene, Nahanni is guarded by the Naha. Different names, different stories, the same warning. Not all land welcomes human ambition. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved, and not all treasures are worth the price demanded to uncover them. Whether one believes in supernatural guardians, hidden human violence, or a convergence of natural dangers amplified by legend, the outcome remains the same. Those who enter these mountains seeking gold often find something else instead: fear, loss, death. Different mountains, same horrors. Final thoughts. In the end, every mystery surrounding the Superstition Mountains seems to collapse into the same question: what is really responsible for all these deaths? Over the years, countless theories have been proposed, some grounded in logic, others drifting into speculation, and a few veering into outright obsession. Each attempts to explain what so many have failed to understand. One of the earliest explanations was simple and human. Some believed a lone sniper once guarded the lost Dutchman's mine, a ruthless individual determined to protect a hidden fortune at any cost. From elevated positions high in the cliffs, this person could have watched the trails, waiting patiently for intruders to wander too close. In such a scenario, decapitations and mutilations might have served as warnings, deliberate acts meant to discourage others from continuing the search. Fear, after all, can travel faster than truth. Others expanded this idea further. They suggest not one guardian, but an entire secretive group, a network of individuals bound by oath or bloodline, passing down the mine's location through generations. According to this theory, the violence was organized, intentional, and sustained, hidden by the vastness of the wilderness and the convenient assumption that the desert simply claimed its victims. There are even those who believe the mine was never about gold at all, but about something else, something valuable enough to justify decades of silence and bloodshed. Then there are the skeptics. They argue that the Superstition Mountains are exactly what they appear to be, a brutally unforgiving environment. Temperatures soar during the day and plummet at night. Trails vanish without warning. Water sources dry up. A single misstep can lead to broken bones, exposure, or death. From this perspective, many of the disappearances make sense. People get lost. People panic. People fall. People turn on each other when desperation sets in. Criminal acts, they argue, are inevitable in isolated regions where law enforcement is distant and accountability is scarce. Add greed, exhaustion, and fear to the equation, and tragedy becomes almost unavoidable. And yet, these explanations never quite account for everything. Not the repeated decapitations, not the careful placement of remains, not the personal items laid out beside bodies, not the eerie similarities between cases separated by decades and continents. Most unsettling of all is the pattern. Again and again, the same elements appear. Treasure seekers, remote wilderness, indigenous warnings ignored, and deaths that defy simple categorization. From Arizona's Superstition Mountains to Canada's Nahanni Valley, the stories echo one another with disturbing precision. Different landscapes, different cultures, the same outcomes. This is where logic begins to falter. Because coincidence can explain a few anomalies, but not so many, repeated so consistently over such a long span of time. To the Apache, the mountains were never just rock and sand. They were alive, inhabited by forces older than memory, forces that demanded respect. The legends were not entertainment. They were warnings. The same can be said of the Dene people of Nahanni. Across cultures separated by thousands of miles, the message is remarkably similar. Some places are not meant to be entered casually, and some knowledge is not meant to be taken. Modern society often dismisses such beliefs as superstition, but history has a way of humbling certainty. Time and again, explorers have laughed at ancient warnings, only to vanish into landscapes they thought they understood. And when their remains are finally discovered, if they are discovered at all, the answers are never as simple as expected. Perhaps the truth lies in a convergence rather than a single cause. Human greed may draw people into these places. The wilderness may strip away their margin for error. Violence, whether human or otherwise, may finish what the environment begins, and layered over it all may be something harder to define, a psychological effect, a geological anomaly, an ancient presence embedded in the land itself, or perhaps something we simply do not yet have the language to describe. What cannot be denied is this: the Superstition Mountains have claimed too many lives to be dismissed as coincidence alone. They have outlasted explorers, prospectors, soldiers, and modern hikers alike. They have watched generations come and go, each convinced they would succeed where others failed. None ever did. The Lost Dutchman's mine remains lost. No verified map has ever surfaced. No undeniable proof has ever been produced. Only fragments of stories and bodies. In that sense, the mountains have kept their secret. And maybe that is the point. Some mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because solving them demands a price too high to justify the answer. Gold has always promised wealth, power, and freedom, but it has also driven people to obsession, isolation, and ruin. For those who venture into the superstitions, believing they can outsmart history, the land offers no mercy. It does not negotiate. It does not forgive. It does not forget. Whether guarded by men, myths, or something far older, the result is the same. Those who seek the Lost Dutchman's gold often lose far more than they gain. And so the mountains stand silent just east of Phoenix, unchanged, unmoved, watching as they always have, waiting. Because for all the theories, debates, and documentaries, one truth remains unshaken. Some places are not meant to be disturbed, and the Superstition Mountains have earned their name.
Shadows crawl